For the love of growth, how to use data to drive cardiovascular service line growth. Today's program is being sponsored by MarketWare and being presented by Carrie Bennett and Katie Alexander. I'd like to give you some background on our presenters today. Carrie Bennett is Vice President of Client Strategy with MarketWare. Her background includes 15 years in healthcare management in a variety of healthcare settings. Her former roles within business development realm include marketing, physician recruitment, onboarding, consumer engagement, and service line planning. Carrie is a graduate of the College of William and Mary. She also has an MBA with emphasis in healthcare management. Katie Alexander is the Director of Physician Relations at Tampa General Hospital. Katie has been with Tampa General Hospital in the Physician Relations role for almost 13 years. She has worked across all service lines, initially as a physician liaison, and currently serves as the Program Director for Physician Relations and Community Outreach. At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Carrie.
Good morning, and thank you so much, or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from today. When I first started focusing on the cardiovascular service line many years ago, heart program startups or expansions had been largely flat or declining across the United States. Regardless of the various reimbursement models that have been introduced, though, cardiac services still represent the opportunity for hospitals and systems to generate the most significant contribution margins. Recent advancements in technology have made it possible to expand clinical offerings. If you take things like TAVR or Watchman or the mitral valve click as an example. Now, even though there's a financial risk tied to introducing some of those newer technologies, hospitals and systems that are really interested in capturing new or out-migrated market share are willing to take a chance in an effort to showcase a halo around their CV service line. Part of this drive to zone back in on cardiovascular services is tied to patient demographics. As most of you know, baby boomers are continuing to drive Medicare enrollments. According to a research letter in the JAMA Internal Medicine, aging baby boomers are living longer, but they also have higher rates of chronic disease, and they have a lower self-rated health when compared to the previous generation. They're also less likely to smoke cigarettes, which then places them in different categories, but still they become an important group to target in or zone in on when it comes to cardiovascular services. When we look at the market as a whole, some other trends that are impacting the cardiovascular service line is the shift that we're seeing of volumes from the inpatient to the outpatient setting. While that makes it intriguing because you're able to market the emergence of minimally invasive techniques, typically those procedures that are occurring in the outpatient setting tend to have less reimbursement tied to them. And with the increased cost of technology, that creates a new balance where we have to kind of be mindful of finding ways to balance demand while controlling our cost. So that means that when we're talking about driving the right level of demand, there are a number of trends that we are seeing across our clients who are focused on cardiovascular services. Namely, how do you work together with providers to position your brand in a way that successfully attracts patients, consumers, referral partners, and payers? What do you do to create an umbrella, if you will, around your entire cardiovascular service line so that you're able to establish a coordinated care effort that helps you nurture your referral relationships that exist, engage patients and then consumers who are prospective patients, and then ultimately, how do you do all that in a way that helps you demonstrate bottom line impact, that you're maximizing the resources that you're investing in your program? And that's a little bit about what we wanted to talk with you about today. Specifically about being data-enabled. How do you have a data-enabled approach? When it comes to getting targeted and being able to share that impact, you really want to understand what data do you consistently have access to and how is it used within your organization or within your program. Whether it's internal data, external data, or even data that you're pulling in from your outreach efforts, what we call tribal data, if you will, how do you pull that together in a way that helps you develop stronger priorities and focus your outreach resources where they're going to add the most value? Can you gather the foundational support you need to build and redirect a facility or a program's referral base? And how do you shape or reshape your ability to measure and effectively communicate what we call ROI which is your return on investment, or in some cases, depending on if you're leading an outreach program as an example, your ROV, or return on visit. So let's start with the internal data, as this is typically the easiest and most cost-effective data for you to access. In fact, most in a business development role have access to some form of internal data that helps highlight maybe procedural trends, admission trends, or even referral trends as they're captured within your hospital or clinic-based EHR. And so, Katie, if you wouldn't mind, help us talk a little bit about what types of questions this helps you answer as a program leader.
Using our internal data at Tampa General, we are able to identify and better understand some things, such as based on our existing referral logs, what business can we not afford to lose, identifying those top priorities there. What can we do to maintain partnerships and relationships we've already created? Which employees need additional education or introduction to network peers who specialize in specific services. Even among our employed primary care providers, we have room for improvement all the time that we can benefit from networking them with specialists. Do first referral trends indicate there's new patient pipelines out there, and how can we further explore these opportunities, and how can we further connect with our own patients to build some brand loyalty?
Those are all really good questions, Katie. And just to show you a couple of examples of how we've seen some different organizations pull that together, this is one example of just looking at outpatient procedures. In fact, specifically, it's interventional cardiologists that are providing care within a specific client cath lab. And as you can see, you're able to explore the trend. Here, it's month-to-month volume, so you're able to see what your trends look like over time. Are you growing? Are you relatively flat? What about your total volumes and your estimated revenue? What can you learn about from your payer mix and from the cost per procedure? And the reason why it's important to explore these different areas of your organization is really to have a good understanding of what are my high volume procedures, but then where are my high value procedures? And what can I do to focus in on where the real opportunity is to move the needle and make this a premier service line for my organization. Similarly, this is actually a month-to-month analysis as well, but this is actually a client month-to-month referral analysis. So instead of looking at procedures being performed by the cardiologist, this particular client is actually looking at the referral data coming in to their cardiovascular clinic. And when you look at this, it can be really helpful to kind of know who the key players are, and those are marked in the dark blue. These are the people that, you know, to your point, Kate, I can't afford to lose, because these are the ones that are our top referring partners of ours, and we want to make sure we maintain those relationships. But what's interesting is I also want to look at maybe some gaps that maybe are signaling a leaky bucket, if you will, like those marked in light blue, and being able to figure out where that may be going and what's happening in those particular practices that may be redirecting those referrals in a different direction. And then lastly, I also like to use this type of report to explore those providers that I'm targeting for growth, which is marked here in pink. You know, can I visualize the work I'm doing on that relationship and it's showing up in the numbers? As an example of the leaky bucket, I do want to point out here that Dr. Juan Aguilera was an active referral source for this particular client until July. And this client saw, they actually traditionally looked at their data kind of year-to-date referrals. And then when they looked at it for the first time month over month, they recognized that Dr. Aguilera had a switch. And they weren't sure if it was because there was a change in his patient population, which wasn't very likely, or if he had a change in referral practices. He was a regional provider, and so their field team went out and met with Dr. Aguilera in his practice and discovered that a competing group had opened a satellite office nearby, and that satellite office happened to be more accessible to his patients. Now, given the demographics of Dr. Aguilera's practice base and patient base, and then as well as the patients for some of the other providers in that area, the cardiology clinic chose to increase their local presence. It was something that they were planning on doing anyway because it made sense for them strategically, but they were able to revamp their timeline in order to improve their own scheduling access. And then they actively partnered with their hospital to promote their advanced capabilities and their clinical outcomes as a differentiator as compared to the new group that was trying to kind of get in there. In addition to looking at total referrals, a lot of my clients find it can be really helpful to also look at first-time referrals into your clinic setting, and then how that compare to your outreach activity. Now, this can be done manually by comparing a referral log or referral data within your EHR to a list of your outreach visits. In this particular dashboard, it's actually done for you automatically, so you can see the first referrals coming in over time. And you're able to take that and look at specifically whether an outreach activity led to a first referral, which is marked in the light blue, if you can see that. And then you can also look at other key stats that can help you understand what is your return on visit, as marked in dark blue, like how many days between a first activity and a first referral. Can you get a sense of what your market turn looks like? And then also, what are the total number of referrals sent? Was it a one and done, or have you been able to earn more business as a result of the first time encounter without any additional prompting, which is the example marked in pink? And whether these come in by default or design, what can you learn about those referrals that you've received? Are they driven by payer mix, patient origin, or some type of unique case type that only your team offers? But what can you do to learn from those and use that as instead of a cold call, use that as a way of collaborating on their first patient and then any new patients so that you can nurture more of those referrals over time. As many of you know, employee does not equal loyal. Just because we hire or acquire a group of primary care physicians and they're employed by our organization, that doesn't really automatically guarantee support of the specialists that you also employ. And that's certainly true in the case of the client feature here. This is actually outbound referral data instead of inbound referral data, which is what I showed on the last two slides. This is outbound referral data. So this is kind of looking at the PCPs within my practice and being able to understand what cardiologists they're sending to within the market. And in this particular case, the client had 3 cardiology groups in the market. One was affiliated with their organization, one was employed by the competition, and the third was still split evenly between the 2 hospitals. And when they looked at their medical group, EMR, they really discovered that only 1/3 of the patients were actually staying in the system. And discovery visits by the liaisons uncovered some referral trends that tied back to when the groups were largely independent and had not aligned with any one group, which everybody knows within the last 2 years, there's been a lot of realignment. So there were just some stakes in the ground and maybe some relationships that were there historically that maybe just didn't necessarily follow or get nipped, if you will, whenever the alignment options took place. And it was also discovered that a lot of the newer cardiologists with capacity for growth were not as well known, and so they weren't really top of mind. So as you can see here on the screen, this client took a very focused effort to reintroduce key cardiologists to their employed physicians and specifically focusing on those newer cardiologists with a lot of capacity. And they were able to drive a 44-point gain towards those cardiologists who were more loyal, if you will, in using their organization as opposed to splitting volumes between either the competition and or the competition and themselves. So this is just kind of another example of how you would use that. Another source of internal data is patient data. And so, this can be data that, again, is derived from your internal EHR. There are also a lot of marketing teams that will actively purchase consumer data. So they'll kind of move into an external data realm and look to purchase groups of specific patient segments, either by geography or age, gender, or all of and above, and they'll use that data to reach out and educate prospective patients regarding maybe new services or providers or special events. Katie, would you mind telling us some of the examples that you've seen both inside your organization and maybe within some of the other markets that you've studied as well?
Yeah, in addition to using internal data to drive outreach targeting, which is primarily what my department does, I also see that internal data can also help you create more effective patient engagement campaigns. An example of that is cardiac teams have used patient data to send a direct mailer to all patients who have received a TAVR valve, inviting them to join the TAVR team to celebrate performing their 500th TAVR procedure. In addition to reaching out to existing patients, you can also use this as an opportunity to invite valve clinic patients in the queue to participate and hear from peers about how the procedure has positively impacted their quality of life. In this particular example, they also were able to invite the media to cover the event and featured specific photos and stories in their social media posts. Another example is you can email an invite to all patients in a PCP practice who are over 50 to promote a complimentary vascular screening offered to the patients who meet specific criteria that place them at high risk. These screenings were done in conjunction with the PAs from an affiliated cardiovascular practice, and in addition to generating a couple of vascular bases, the event was also used to promote and extend the cardiovascular clinic's brand to potential prospects. Another example is you can provide a welcome mailer to all consumers between 55 and 75 who are moving into a specific zip code, and this incident, it was a retirement community, to introduce our team of cardiac specialists, including a health profile that can be placed on the consumer's fridge in case of an emergency. You can also send a notice from a PCP to all of the patients who are on an AFib medication who have been referred to a GI specialist within the last 2 years to make them aware of a new treatment option for those who cannot tolerate warfarin, the Watchman device. And you can invite females within the community to a heart-to-heart event that features the unique symptoms, diagnostic tools, and treatment options specific to women with heart disease and how to protect their hearts through key transitions. So just getting better with your targeting and reaching the right patients with your marketing. This is an example of how we use data to drive some new patient volume in our organization. With the help of our CRM tool, we were able to identify consumers who are most at risk for cardiac conditions and then build a paid search and email campaign that was geo-targeting those populations. An example of this is a campaign we ran on atrial fibrillation with targeted banner ads and marketing automation emails to some of our existing patients who have been in our system and received treatment for AFib, and reaching out to non-existing patients, potential patients who have similar diagnosis. The effectiveness of this campaign can be measured by looking at delivered versus opened emails, click-through rates, new patient conversions, and existing patient hospital utilization for clinically relevant diagnosis after receiving some sort of interaction with a targeted marketing piece. On the next slide, I have a couple of examples of the marketing that we used in this campaign. So you see a banner ad, should we see a cardiologist with a free health risk assessment, AFib symptoms, find out if you're at risk. So in an age of savvy consumers, medical moms, and a more engaged and educated patients, we've had to up our marketing game a bit to be relevant to issues consumers are searching for, and then deliver content that's useful to them. So offering a free health risk assessment is one of the tools that we found the consumer engages heavily with because it delivers a result on the spot and provides them then with the resources to understand the results that they get from that health assessment. And we also give them the tools to seek appropriate medical follow-up. So at this point, it's more than just an ad, it's a resource for the patient. So after we run a campaign like this, a campaign is only as good as your results. So having the capability to track the impressions and interactions and understanding what your conversion rate is helps you plan for future campaigns and prove to your administration that what you've invested in with this tool and your marketing is worth it in the long run. So at the end of this campaign that we ran on AFib, we tracked the success, allowing us to conclude that 361 consumers had an encounter with our system after receiving the email or they actually clicked through the banner ad. 3.3% of them actually became new patients. And then we were able to track and attribute a contribution margin of $281,000 to this campaign, which was well over what we spent on it. And another way that we've used our internal data in the same consumer tracking way is to drive participants to some of our physician-led outreach lectures. Using the same CRM tool and geo-targeting consumers appropriately, we look for consumers that have had clinically relevant diagnosis that we've been able to target and drive revenue to service lines through community outreach campaigns. In the example pictured here, we wanted to host a 3-part community education lecture series on heart health given by one of our cardiologists. We used our consumer data to target and identify the population in our immediate market that was at the greatest risk for heart disease by identifying diagnosis data, age, other demographics, and we actually assigned an average household income to this as well. So using this targeted mailing approach, we were able to bring in 64 participants to our series. It resulted in 30 new patients to our system with a contribution margin of $100,000. And our total spend for the program on marketing and the actual program cost was only $4,000. So over time, we continue to track the growing contribution margin and further target these attendees with relevant resources to continue to improve their heart health. So basically, once they're in our system, as showing an interest in this topic, we try to send them other additional resources via email or other channels just to kind of stay front of mind about what we have available around that.
Thank you, Katie. Now, as we transition to other sources of external data, you know, we have a lot of different ways of studying what's occurring in our market. You know, when it comes to internal data, we can see what's occurring within our system. That external data allows us to really peek and see what's happening in other systems and compare those trends to our own. So whether it's state data or CMS data or ambulatory claims data or prescription data, being able to kind of understand, you know, what's going on in the market and being able to use that to put the pieces of the puzzle together that we may not have from the very start can really help us get a better picture of what's happening. As an example, in my last hospital, and Katie, well, first, tell me about some of the ways that, or the things that you're trying to answer as far as being able to use external data to push forward your strategic objectives.
Sure. So based on our strategic plan as of the organization, we want to know which service lines are poised for growth and why, so that we can invest our resources in the right areas. What growth accelerators are driving these assumptions? Is it a new physician, a new procedure, demand? Are there growth barriers that need to be mitigated? Are there specific volumes I should go after to maximize service line performance? Understanding who the top providers are for these and where do they prefer to practice, so that we know if we're controlling the market share or if there's a big competitor and where we can turn that business around for our benefit. And what is our current market position? Are we in a position to gain or lose market share?
Fantastic. As I mentioned a moment ago, in my last hospital system, I actually was a part of the system in Georgia, and we had access to state data, so we could really look and see who the key players were in our market. For example, who our top cardiologists were based on the admissions that were being submitted. The challenge with that, of course, is that the state data typically, depending on what state you're in, may or may not be collected. If it's collected, it may just be inpatient only, or it may be represented only by the voluntary outpatient groups that are participating. In this client's example, they actually were looking at cardiovascular surgeries and getting an idea of who the top CV surgeons were and where they preferred to practice. And they were able to kind of understand that at this point in time they had 35% market share, but based on a recent acquisition of a busy cardiovascular surgeon, their number one competitor was able to reach 31%. And so this gave them, you know, an idea of what that looked like, but again, as they started to look at some of the things that were maybe moving more to an outpatient setting, especially as there's a focus on minimally invasive surgery among the competing group, they were somewhat limited in not being able to answer that question with state data alone. That's where it can be helpful to maybe look at other sources of data. And so they were able to look at CMS data, and that way they could identify key practitioners that are not only based on inpatient volume, but outpatient volume. And they were also able, based on the way the data was organized, they were able to go a step further than they could with the state data and be able to see shared patients over time. And this helped fill in some of the gaps That said, it's obviously just a single payer source, and as most of you know, the CMS data can be somewhat dated as compared to other sources of external data, and so, which is a challenge when your market changes quite rapidly as compared to the time frame of the data. This is why there are some groups who are very interested in exploring claims data, which allows you to have a broader set of data for both the inpatient outpatient side, and it does cover more than just a single payer group. And when you look at this, you're able to kind of get a sense of, you know, what is your market position within a service line, a sub-service line, a specialty, or even at a specific procedure level. And in this scenario, we actually pulled in interventional cardiologists. And this particular market has about 228 interventional cardiologists, 13% of which are tied to one of the two clients' facilities, or one of the clients' two facilities, rather, representing about $44 million in estimated revenue. And when we take a look at this, we can not only kind of get a sense of who's on our team as represented by green, but it allows you to kind of also see who's not on my team and where are they sharing patients. So in this example, the client actually filtered out all of their in-network providers and wanted to focus on the top 5 out-of-network providers to get a sense of who are these individuals and, you know, how many patients are a part of their panel, how many claims are filed by the provider, what types of claims, what's the estimated revenue for that provider, and then what is their payer mix? You know, are they getting the patients that we wouldn't want anyway from a contribution margin aspect, or is there some really strong payers in there that may be interesting to attract, you know, over into our camp, if you will. From there, what's interesting is, again, depending on how your claims data is analyzed and compiled, you're able to look at shared patients. And within claims data, you can actually assign a patient a unique ID based on different factors that you wouldn't be able to see because it'd be blind to you to protect their patient information. But you're able to look at that unique ID and see which provider saw that patient both before and after, so that you're able to get a sense of what those relationships look like. And that can be represented similar to this. So if I look at these 5 cardiologists, then I'm able to drill down and say, okay, I want to see all of the primary care physicians who tend to share patients with those 5 cardiologists, so I can get a sense of maybe who is referring those patients in. Now, there are going to be cases where they're sharing patients, but the patients actually self-selected to go to those cardiologists and or were driven by insurance to go to those cardiologists. But you can see, based on the strength of the relationships, where some referral patterns likely exist. And you can also look at outbound relationships so that you're able to get a sense of, okay, for these 5 cardiologists, which thoracic surgeons are they tending to share patients with, and can you ascertain what referral patterns exist there as a result of looking at those shared relationships. Now, in this example, you can see for, that green kind of pops out with Dr. Desai, and Dr. Desai is in the client's network. And so, obviously, this represents a potential leakage, and you want to understand why that exists and how to curb it. And being able to just even see this just gives you an opportunity to have a conversation and figure out you know, what might be a factor there, and is there an opportunity to regroup and redirect that over time. And so, Katie, let's talk about shared patient analysis. I was going to share a couple of examples of how we, you know, kind of use the analysis that I just showed you to define loyalty. But tell me, when it comes to building your cardiovascular program, are there specific examples of how you've been using shared patients?
Shared patient analysis is kind of the starting point that all of my physician liaisons use when they go out on the road for the first time to launch a new campaign. So as I highlighted with our AFib marketing campaign a couple of slides back, we also launched an AFib outreach campaign when we were doing some new procedures associated with that, and we're involved in some trials. So the first kind of line of defense that one of my physician liaisons will use is to launch an analysis of shared patients. They'll go into our system and they'll look and see where are we getting our referrals from in terms of who are our specialists sharing the most patients with and having the strongest connections. And then they'll look at the competitors doing the same types of procedures and analyze their shared patient relationships also so that they can build themselves a list of physicians to go out and target with outreach to begin to understand what the nature of that relationship is. Is it an intentional referral pattern with shared relationships, or do they just happen to share patients, or is there a way that we can intervene with educating and providing networking opportunities that might be able to shift some of the referrals in our direction? To use it to look at typical referral pathways for procedures and service lines, and as the slide states, you know, when researching, we do non-employed partners in our market. We want to look at, you know, who are they sharing patients with. We want to look at our own employed providers, as you've already alluded to, and understand those shared patients. And then for connections that appear weak, how can we further explore the prospect's willingness to potentially redirect patients to the provider?
Those are great examples. I like to also, I mean, whenever I'm looking at it, I like to download the information in certain ways and be able to pivot off the information to kind of get a sense of, can I group different providers into buckets that kind of give me an idea of if there are three camps, if there's my camp, the competitor number one and competitor number two, what can I do to group and understand the loyalty connections and kind of understand my network integrity, if that makes sense. And so I'm able to kind of say, okay, these providers we understand are loyal to us because they're giving us 80% or more of their business. Anything that isn't, you know, patient request or insurance driven away from us, you know, we're getting, and the goal is to maintain those relationships. And then here are my reliable splitters. I probably get 2/3 of their business. Again, I lose a little bit based on relationships they have, but what can I do to nurture these relationships and kind of keep them in my reliable camp? And then I also, you know, you obviously can rule out some of your non-loyals because if they're within a network that you know that they're going to be have certain pressure and or a commitment within, you know, to refer away from you, then you know that those are kind of a natural group to weed out. But there may be some niche markets if you offer something that their team doesn't. You know, what can you do just to uncover those and only focus on those and not waste your time on some of the other things? And then the kind of sweet spot are those inconsistent referral patterns where someone doesn't really seem to have a favorite. And so what do you need to know to learn about them in order to really emerge as their provider of choice? And this is just an example of an analysis that I did for a client where they had 3 primary competitors. And so we were able, this is only a slight example, but we were able to do 100 different referral partners and group them in different categories. And we were able to do that in order of, you know, how many shared patients they typically shared with a cardiovascular provider. And that way, again, you don't focus on someone who has just 7 instead of the people who may have like 170 different referral patterns. But how do you group them into, say, a loyal splitter, a variable splitter, or a reliable splitter, and then be able to kind of pair that with the internal trends based on the referral volumes you're seeing. Are they stable? Are they growing? Are they declining? And from that, how do you then mobilize your outreach team to either maintain that relationship, nurture the relationship, recover the relationship, or target that person for growth? And that's a way that I really like to use this data whenever I'm partnering within my own organizations in the past or when I'm partnering with clients today. That's what I find is pretty helpful. So let's, Katie, talk about impact. I think that's, again, where you can kind of put your money where your mouth is. You're able to say, you know, this is not just what we were going to say we're going to do, but what we've actually been able to make happen. And I know that you've given some great examples based on your consumer campaign, but if we look at being able to communicate the impact of other efforts, you know, how is it that you really use the data to tell your story? And I know that the example I'm showing now is from a client database where, you know, we're trying to look at outreach activity and volumes and be able to kind of understand where those are aligned so that you're able to demonstrate that the activity you were doing was driving performance. And there's some other ways that you can, if you have access to good data and you know the value of a patient in your system, then there's some great ways I've seen other clients pull together summaries that show the bottom line impact. Like, for example, in the variance month-over-month report and the first referrals report that I shared earlier, you can see that there were some gaps in referrals that you're able to recover. If you understand the value of those patients and you are able to demonstrate that you either recovered those patients successfully or that your outreach following their first referral, helped you secure a second, third, or fourth referral, then how can you quantify that and be able to show the impact of that over time? And then, Katie, you and I, we've talked about other ways of using data. Even if you're looking at a whole plan, being able to show the big picture and say, okay, if we had these 4 strategies that we were using to help grow structural heart cases, what was the incremental impact? Not the volume we had before, but what did we get that was a little bit extra? What's the profitability per case? And then how do we compare that to what we spent so that we're able to show a positive ROI? And I think you have some really great examples specific to Tampa. Katie, I know that the group would love to hear, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So if we think back to the report that was mentioned earlier that looks at a state data for market trends, you might remember it allows you to look at who the key players are in the market by service line and determine your position in the market. Using this approach allowed me to see that while volume was high for our market, we're just a small piece of the vascular surgery pie, as it's saturated with surgeons that are geographically displaced across our competition. So a little screenshot up here from the system shows that we have 114 total vascular surgeons in what we define as our market, and only a small percentage of that are actually at Tampa General. So you have the picture here of the state and where the claims are being filed within the state for vascular surgery, the total volume, and then it attributes an opportunity to us if we were to capture 100% of that market. So this awareness of the market, it drove our vascular surgery team to create a strategy around the aortic aneurysm program to be a differentiator in our market. We got together a multidisciplinary team and said, what is it that we're doing that our competitors aren't doing, or what is it that we're doing better than any of our competitors? So we kind of landed on this aortic aneurysm program, and both from an operations and marketing perspective, did some work around it to streamline the intake of the referrals, create a navigator who walks the patient through our whole system, a multidisciplinary approach from the surgeon's perspective in which we had cardiothoracic surgeon, vascular surgery, and interventional radiology all working together on each individual patient's case to determine who would best be suited to treat the patient. And once we had all those things in line, we could use this data to get up and running and launch the outreach campaign. We used the data on our end to understand our market before we ever left the hospital to go out and market it. It's important to know where you're going and where you've been. So we conducted an analysis of our facility market share and looked by zip code to see where we had the greatest presence already in our market. My physician relations program operates in a strike zone of the 20 to 80% rule, believing that we'll have the greatest ability to move the needle on referrals from sources that already have established at least 20% referral loyalty to our organization. So our first tier for outreach is derived from this zone where there's 20 to 80% there, and then we branch out into the numbers below 20% to broaden the reach. For this aortic campaign, we targeted the top 4 zip codes where we had 14% or greater. So you can see those highlighted in the gray box. Our outreach plan included office visits conducted by the physician rep to educate offices on the criteria for our aortic aneurysm program. This involved dispelling some misconceptions that we only treat aneurysms surgically and educating them on our medical management. And on these site visits, the rep would determine the level of interest by the referring practice in meeting with either our coordinator, that navigator, or one of our providers, and we'd schedule a follow-up meeting. We also use CME programs as kind of a big tool for our outreach. So we hosted CME programs targeting physicians in these zip codes, and we offered physician-led community lectures to patients as well. So then after the fact, it's important to go back and take a look and measure your impact. In 3 of the 4 targeted zip codes, we were able to improve market share, and we held constant in the 4th. So we looked back after 6 months of being out on the road with our physicians and promoting the program and wanted to measure what impact there was in our market share. So over the course of the 6 months, we're able to target 193 referring physicians. We got those physicians from our data, looking at who was driving referrals through those network connections that we mentioned earlier. And we did in-person meetings, and we're able to increase the revenue to this service line by $1.5 million in gross charges. And once we had established a data-driven approach with results for the aorta program, we applied the same model to some of our other cardiovascular service lines and tracked the progress year over year. My program always focuses on adjusted new revenue. So when it works, repeat. With the aorta program model, it was under our belt, so we looked at these other campaigns here. We took the same method into heart transplant, cardiology, interventional radiology, continued the vascular surgery, and branched out into other vascular surgery procedures, cardiac surgery, and TAVR. And overall, when we look back at the year, which we track all of these in our PRM, we had made 356 office visits, had done 16 lunches, 12 CMEs, and engaged 345 unique physicians in attending our CME program. The bottom line impact is it's important to know your numbers because it helps you plan for the future. So not every campaign will be successful every time. Our rep was focusing specifically on cardiac surgery and TAVR as separate service lines, and we found that the revenue actually declined in these areas. We identified some operational issues internally as a result of going out and meeting with referring physicians, and realized that that was contributing to this decline. And we weighed the cost of the promotion versus what we got in return. So after evaluating all these factors, we decided that we would actually stop marketing these as individual service lines and just include them as a cross-sell. It was important that we mention that our cardiac surgery and TAVR capabilities in our outreach, but without any differentiating services and being late to the market, we found our time was better focused on transplant, VADS, interventional cardiology, where we were offering the most cutting edge and minimally invasive procedures. Another valuable use for data in our example was identifying where we were losing cardiac patients from our employed primary care network. We referenced this earlier in some of the slides, but I'm noticing just now as we're looking at this that we didn't get the titles changed on this grid here. So where it says incremental volume, that actually should be 2015 to 2016 revenue, and where it says profitability should be 2016 to 2017. So basically what I'm doing in this chart is I'm looking at the change year over year. So if you look at the shift of employed PCP referrals to loyal cardiology practices, in 2015, we actually noticed that we had referred $7.5 million outside of our network for cardiac care. So that in essence should be a negative 7.5. With some education to our employed primary care providers and creating networking opportunities for them with our affiliated cardiologists and surgeons, we were able to turn that loss into a gain of $1.6 million. So this was actually a net impact of $5.9 million just by redirecting from losing those outside of our system to shoring them up in our system. When we combine that effort of shoring up our employed primary care referrals with tracking the success of the other physician relations campaigns and CME programs, we determined that we were able to increase revenue from providers we targeted $1 million year over year with our outreach. So as I'm sure any of you who are using a PRM tool with claims data to track your impact have encountered, when you bring your administration a number like 6.47 million and try to take credit for that, they'll be quick to jump to skepticism. However, using the very conservative measures we've identified and being able to adequately explain the data and the methodologies for how we track it, we've found that our senior vice presidents and our C-suite have actually had incredible buy-in to believing our return on investment. So whether or not we can take 100% credit for the $6 million gain, when your administration is able to see that year over year your volumes and contribution margin are improving and your overall program revenue is growing, they'll be more inclined to get behind the efforts of your team and the investment in your data.
Those are great examples, Katie. Thank you so much for sharing. Crystal, we have some time for questions that the participants may have shared as part of the presentation. Would you mind telling us some that we can answer today?
Yeah, definitely. So we had quite a few questions come in, and thank you for, sharing all of your insights with us, both Katie and Carrie. I'll kind of just start here at the top. We had quite a few come in, but the first one was, how do you track a patient from the screening into or through the hospital or to a doctor and then to a hospital? I'll kind of kick that off to you, Katie.
Sure, and on that end, we actually use a CRM tool that we purchased, and that allows us to track the patient using our own. It pulls in data from our EMR. So once a patient completes the health assessment screening online, if they're willing to give us their name and a few of their pieces of their demographic information, it goes into an initiative within our CRM tool that then looks for any encounters that patient has within our EMR and attributes a revenue dollar to that over time. So it's not done hands-on on our end. It is a tool that we purchased, but it's able to use our internal data to do that analysis.
Perfect. And I know we had a lot of questions around leveraging technology and tools. I'll kind of kick off with, I know you had mentioned PRM and CRM, maybe just kind of share, what those tools are. And then as a follow-up, Carrie, a good question for you would be, who provides the data? What's, kind of share a little bit more about, does it come from, is it, state data, CMS data? What's kind of the input in that?
Sure. And so just to answer the first question, PRM stands for Physician Relations Management System. And so it allows you, or Provider Relations Management System, where you're able to capture the demographics and details related to the providers that you're actively engaging as referral sources, and then being able to track the relationship and the initiatives that you might be working on at that particular point in time. Similarly, a CRM would be like Centric, which is one of our products that's a consumer relationship management system, and it's basically helping also to pull together different forms of consumer data and helping you keep track of the different ways you're engaging specific patients or prospect patients into specific campaigns. And then, as Katie mentioned, if it's integrated with your EHR or EMR tool, then you're able to find different ways to track unique patients and be able to see what type of return lifetime value that patient has as a result of that campaign. As far as other sources of data, in addition to your internal data, which obviously comes from your clinic or your hospital EHR system, you are able to, again, hospitals that are participants in their state hospital association who are actively giving data to those groups usually have the opportunity for a nominal fee to be able to get that data back out and use that to look at market share trends. But there are also options of being able to purchase CMS or other third-party claims data. That's something that we help our clients do. And then you're able to, you're able to either use that data manually, or if you have access to an integrated PMR tool that allows data analysis like Ascend and Scout, then you're able to then pull that information together and have some of the dashboards that we shared today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that. And then a great question for you, Katie. I think this was referring to, one of the slides you had earlier, but how do you address those areas that showed a decline, such as the TAVR?
So in that area, we were able, as I mentioned, to identify some operational and some internal issues and some issues in our market. So I'll take TAVR as an example. In our market, we were the last hospital to offer that procedure. So we were just late to the game, and we were in kind of a saturated market, but our hospital had invested in this program and the infrastructure to do this procedure. It was important that we at least get the education out there that even though we're last, we are doing it. So after we kind of blanketed the cardiologists in our market and primary care docs and let them know that the procedure was available, and then we're able to look back at, well, as a physician relations campaign, this actually was a loss. we were able to reprioritize and identify. We didn't need to continue to dedicate a rep to this service line. We would just mention it in our cross-selling for other cardiology procedures. And this actually happens every year when we look back at our ROI by service line. There's always one that kind of stands out as something we invested a lot of time in, and the return just is not there. Another great example of this for us is IVF, for in vitro fertilization. We were realizing that we had to do a lot of work just to get the patient to receive an IVF transfer and procedure, and we only made $1,200 per transfer. So at the end of the year, we spent roughly $47,000 on the campaign, and our intake was about 12. So we just kind of took a step back and said, yes, it's important to make referring providers aware that we offer this, but this isn't something that we're going to put all our resources behind for an outreach campaign.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for answering that. And as a follow-up, I know we talked about data, but you know, what claims data provider do you use, Katie, or have you used in the past?
Sure. So we've used claims data at Tampa General since 2011. We actually started with the advisory board's Crimson Market Advantage, and we are currently MarketWare customers, in full disclosure. But for the CRM, which we talked about, we are actually HealthGrades customers for the CRM tool.
Excellent, thank you. And I know you talked a little bit about marketing automation earlier, and being a marketer myself, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. But just kind of going off of your program, do you make, regarding your marketing automation program, do you send emails, newsletters, kind of how do you nurture your patient campaigns?
So once we get you in our system, we obviously want to stay front of mind without being annoying about it. So we do targeted email campaigns that are relevant to what we know about the person who's captured in our system. So we try to target based on age, sex, any kind of interest you've shown in the past in a program maybe you attended, or clicking through on an AFib banner ad, and make them make sense. So February is a great time to take advantage of this heart message. So we might send out an email that has kind of a subtle medical undertone that could have an article or a recipe or just a tip or something that you might find useful and worth opening, but also underlying messages, keeping front of mind that TGH is your heart hospital.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we actually had that kind of came through there. Thanks again, Katie and Carrie, for sharing your insights and for your time today, and then everyone else for joining us on the call.